Hello, everyone. Welcome to Forge the Narrative. My name is Paul, your host, available also as podcast. I'm joined by Tanya Gates,
Hey, everybody.
Adam Camilleri, and Red Powell.
G'day.
What up? Welcome to the show, everyone. Let's see. We're going to talk about some of the new Kill Team coming out. You can, I think, get your first pre-order coming up over the course of the next couple of weekends. There's a new battle report out published by Games Workshop where they run through using the new factions, which is pretty neat. We've actually seen the game demoed on the Nova Open Twitch stream that Games Workshop did a few weeks ago. And, well, we'll talk a little bit about our first impressions of it and then do a deep dive over the next course of a couple of weeks. Then on the back half of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about, net listing. Good, bad, and different. Do you want to do it? How do you do it? How would you do it? How do you beat it if you're not going to do it? We're going to discuss some of the stuff around that. Looking forward to it. How are y'all doing this evening?
Yeah, I'm great. Yeah, I did a Twitch stream earlier. If people want to watch me paint stuff, you can check me out on Twitch. It's a lot of fun. I'm so glad to be back there.
What's your Twitch channel?
The_War Mistress.
Nice.
I know. I'm the same thing everywhere.
Check it out on Instagram.
Consistency is key. Build that brand.
Be impressed. Yeah. Always be impressed by the painting. It is far and away the best painter on this broadcast.
My team, but really I won a Best Painting Award at the event this weekend that I went to. So
Nice.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we won by 1 point, but I mean, I feel pretty good about it because
might as well been 1,000.
That's right. That's right. You know what it was that pushed us over the edge was our hand-painted backdrop that I did. That was an extra point, I'm sure.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, good to hear about it. Which way you tell us what that was later on. And anyway, Kill Team is brand new. It used to be, dealing with little measurements of circles and squares and pentagons. Now they're taking us back to the olden times using tape measures.
Just using the tape. You still need your combat gauge. Combat gauge is a very, very, very useful tool. It's the same delineation. A lot of ones, a lot of twos, a lot of threes. So the combat ranges, the ranges of objective control, all that stuff will be quite familiar to a lot of people. But there are a lot of little changes, as far as I can tell, that have been really well received by the community.
I mean, I'll tell you right now, right out the gate, I play with my kids, right? Like we play Kill Team. We get into the different games and everything. And when it comes to Kill Team, I appreciate the change back to just simple measurement pieces of, hey, this is 5 inches, this is an inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, because and I love them so much. But when it comes to a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I'm sitting there saying, it's a square away.
Square.
And they're like, what? I'm like, just come on, man. Like, get like this. They're like, why does this game use shapes for measurements? I was like, I don't know. Just do it. You've got a combat gauge. Now, we also have, I'm a big fan, and I have several, right? I've got a Wrong Way Kids. I've got my own. But I have like 40k combat gauges that I use, right? That are like, it's 9 inches for deployment. That's the long edge. And then I've got, 2 inches for engagement range at one side of it. And then another side's 3. And then it's got like a curved part off that's like at 6 inches. So I can essentially do all sorts of different quick measurements just by flipping this thing around. And the combat gauge for Kill Team, and I've seen, they demoed or they showed the new one that's coming out. It looks great, and it's going to be super useful, just like the other one was.
Some of the things do function very similarly, though. You are going to be playing with a Kill Team, a small number of models. You are going to interact very similarly, like you're going to have your orders, your concealer, your engage orders. That's the same, and you're going to, in the fight, like this is one of the coolest things, the actual fighting when you get up close for close combat. It's almost like a duel, like you're actually throwing yourselves into each other, and it's a bit of a back and forth type duel. I'm glad that's going to be the same as well, because that's kind of one of the unique things about this game system.
Well, that's what I always loved about the Kill Team combat, because in so many other games, it's like, all right, so you're going to hit me, and I'm apparently not going to do anything about being hit. I'm just going to be like, can I hit you yet? Did I die? Or if I'm not dead, I get to hit you back. If I don't die, like I'm just like, Whereas in Kill Team, it's a series of roll-offs that happen simultaneously, and I think it's a really good system.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar with what we're talking about, basically you've got a certain number of attacks, and you both models have attacks, and in that fight order engagement, you both roll your dice, and whoever has the initiative in that fight gets to assign their dice first. So every successful hit, they can either assign it as a push damage through to the combatant, or they could parry, knock away, block one of their opponent's hits. And there's criticals are in this game as well, so criticals parry or do critical damage. So if your opponent has the critical, you need a critical to engage with it and counter with it, or you push your own criticals through, and you go back and forth assigning your dice until all your successes are gone or the combatant is dead.
And the assigning of first hits delineates the person who kind of made contact, which makes a lot more sense than someone resolving all, in say 40k, an orc boy makes a charge and they resolve all 39 of their attacks. And then you have to cop them all and then see if you're alive enough to strike back. Whereas I think in Kill Team, where you just get your first kind of initiative, much more representative of what a duel would be or a little combat would be.
That's what it feels like, is that you are in kind of a swirling maelstrom, and you have a little bit more control over what happens. And it's honestly, though, even if you're rolling a bunch of attack dice, it feels like those first two dice kind of matter the most, and then you kind of try to set things up in your favor. But let's just say it works the same way that it did in the previous version, and that's cool because it is a unique characteristic about this game that I think makes that part of the phase more interactive and enjoyable.
And in editions gone past of Kill Team, there was a lot more, I guess, Kill Team was much more aligned with other game systems, where it was to some extent looked at as a feeder. No, well, not a feeder, an entry level to larger game systems. And they're diverging more and more away from that, where Kill Team has its own flavor, has its own very bespoke and interesting interactions, and plays completely differently to various other games. You can still pick up moving a miniature and rolling the dice sequence and stuff like that is going to be applicable to pretty much everything GW does. But I like that they're diverging into their own identity even more in this edition. I think that's really good.
So first, I had my camera, thankfully, I turned it off because my physical reaction I felt was better masked as you're going off on this. Because, I mean, we've talked about this, right? Like, GW does this amazing thing where they come out with these games, they make these side games, or other games, right? Age of Sigmar, we've talked about it, and like how some of the great advancements that have been made for Age of Sigmar, and even Apocalypse, right? When I go, you go, I go, you go.
Yeah.
And then Kill Team has amazing mechanics. It's actually, I think, one of the better. There's no ranges for most of the weapons because magically your bolt rifle doesn't just go 24 inches in the scale of whatever. It goes the whole way.
Falls right in the ground.
Hey, look, I shoot a rocket grenade essentially and I can see you. I can probably hit you with that, right, at this distance across the map. I
actually really like that because you're assuming that your operatives are not dinguses and brought war gear and weaponry equipped for the place they're being deployed to. They're not like, I'm going to go into battle with this pistol.
I mean, again, like there's just a lot of I got it. All problems or all
we play in a slight abstract.
Broken. Yeah, all systems are broken. You just got to pick whichever one's the best, right? You go through it from there. That's a thing. There's a statistician that said that about systems and how they work and everything, and I get it. Blah 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 blah. We suspend it and we move on and we just go with what works. And yet, like, it's amazing because we talk about in 40k how frequently rules are updated, how frequently codexes come out, new things. And Kill Team, the book, this has been a long time coming in the edition update, right? Like that has been a while since. I mean, we've been working really off. Now, there's been some updates. There was the boarding actions and moving into Gallo Dark and
a compendium or something that updated some Kill Team.
Correct.
Stats.
Yeah, right, and kind of brought everything in line. But this is a major update. This is really the revisiting, and there's also the part of like the different bespoke kill teams that have been dropped in the different sets. The mandrakes versus the Night Lords, so on and so forth, different teams, and they've all come with their own different elements that have continued to add into this game. I disagree with you, Adam, only semantically in regards of like where I still think Kill Team is the introduction. I think that in a lot of cases it's a smaller game. You can play really easily, and you can get these mechanics that go to all the different games, right? Like I could go from Kill Team to Necromunda, I can go from Kill Team to 40k, and there's a lot of things to it. There is more, but you're right in the sense that they have carved out a deeper niche for Kill Team that if you want to excel in certain areas of it as you go from just getting into the game, because they introduce weapon skill, they introduce ballistic skill, they introduce, measuring movement, getting over terrain. I arguably think the terrain rules in Kill Team are some of the best. And how you go with that. And so like how, and I mean, even just how you move up and over terrain, right? And what you do with that, the actions in Kill Team, understandably, you're dealing with a smaller force. Management of actions is a much more engaging effort because there's different actions. You have a certain number of action points based on what kind of unit you are, whereas actions are a more generalized thing in 40k because you're a broader scale kind of deal. Yeah. And so all that makes sense, but it is very much, I think, Kill Team's a powerful system, and I'm also really excited, especially after my time at Gen Con with it. They've taken the system that some of the team really picked up, the GW team picked up and ran with, not just this year, but they really started it last year with some of the kind of the co-op versus the NPC behavior setup that they have. And so you can do co-op missions now in the new, and it's going to be baked into the rule set where if you want to do it like that. And then the opposing team is more of like a swarm level stuff, but they have behaviors where they follow those set behaviors, and it's not, it's a very cool system. I'm a big fan to see it. You can also, if you see the Dark Tide, they made a Dark Tide box set that's out there that has something similar to that too. And again, all these systems use the Kill Team set, and which I think is, again, this great working foundation for these smaller games to build off of.
You're speaking briefly about the Joint Ops Mission Pack. Yes. And there is a whole section on behavior that you will find for the NPOs. They have behavior in their name that determines what they do. Each behavior will specify what order they have when activated. Whenever an NPO would perform an action, including when counteracting, perform the first action it can do from its behavior. If it cannot do any, it's expended or pass the case in the case of counterattacking. So you're right. It gives you some clear rules on what that does, so you can play that kind of different game, not just you versus the opponent. It could be versus the environment,
which is cool and great. And you can also, like what we did at Gen Con, you can have a dungeon master equivalent, right? A game master that's also running these NPOs and kind of helping to insert them into the mission kind of deal against a team of people playing co-op, which again, I think is super exciting, a lot of fun and a lot of engagement in this new edition. And so it's really good to see it refresh and where they're going with it.
And I want to challenge you both also semantically.
Here we go.
That was my semantic component. No, you can just be a Kill Team player. Like, that's one of the coolest things about it. Maybe, Adam, this is what you were talking about. Like, instead of being the gateway, the entry to another game, that you can. This is a fully supported game that you can just do this, and you will find a community of people that just play this. Like we were talking about Spearhead a few weeks ago. Like, there are already Spearhead tournaments, Spearhead communities that have spawned up that are not going into big AOS, as folks are calling it. They are Spearhead players, and you will find Kill Team players and Blood Bowl players and whatever. And that's one of the neatest things about in my opinion, Games Workshop's commitment to these games and the frequent release schedule is that it has kind of given the confidence to players or potentially new players that the game will persist and they could just focus their time on this and not have to learn it just to learn something else.
100% agree.
And this new edition is certainly going to inspire probably more folks to get into it. And we did kind of jump into some the nitty gritty, but Adam, you were talking about some of the other like maybe changes from the previous edition.
Yeah, so one of the ones that was, I guess, a little bit So people, I think the change people are most happy to see, and definitely when we were canvassing the people sitting at Nova watching the game, everyone wanted to know how heavy cover works. How does heavy cover work? And people were talking about how a savvy player could make part of their army borderline uninteractable by use of a heavy cover and a bunch of other nuanced movement, tips and tricks people pick up over the title of the game. Now, if you're shooting somebody in heavy cover, you can't get critical hits. So just straight off the top, you can't get critical hits, and you always drop off a hit. Is my recollection.
Critical hits are if you roll whatever the critical number is, 5 or 6,
Yeah.
typically 6s. Then
Typically
it will do some extra damage or something will happen or whatever.
Your weapon profile will delineate how much damage a hit does, how much damage a critical hit does. And essentially, if you're in heavy cover, you can't be critically hit straight off the bat, but you're no longer just sitting there in heavy cover waiting for your time to go out and grab all the points, which is definitely a thing people identified as a way that the game was non-interactive. And this is top-level stuff people are talking about. Like, they would just be like, well, see, these 4 operatives, they're just going to stage up and be possibly non-interactable. Of course, you can go charge them, dig them out. There's always going to be interplay with a game with a I guess a tactic like that where you choose to do nothing and you just kind of cede the board to your opponent for a bit. But people were just really happy to hear, like, I got a chance to dig people out without having to go and fisticuffs them. Like, if they're all commandos and they're good at fisticuffs and they just stage up and be uninteractable, and you're playing the Tau Fire Warrior, you're not exactly going to go shiv and outshank the all commandos. It's not going to be a thing you could do. But now you've got some chance to interact with them in a lot of those ways, and that's one of the biggest changes because while we were having that demo game at Nova, there was people walking around, doing Q&As with the people. This was awesome. These were designers of the game, people well versed in the new edition of Kill Team, like just interacting with the community, being like, what do you want to know about the new game? Like, what is important for you to know? And by doing so, they're giving the community, some really cool insights, but also harvesting, some knowledge pieces about what is important to the player base. And I thought it was really cool of them.
If you are not familiar with how Kill Team works, you are operating with a squad, but each one of those squad members, the Kill Team operatives, activate independently. They are essentially an army of one. They represent, some like a special forces unit, special forces operative that, even that Tau Fire Warrior you're talking about probably still has 8 wounds. Or something along those lines. It's not just a one shot, one kill. These are you get that full experience of being able to operate as a specialist.
Like, usually in games, in your kill team, you'll have 1, maybe 2 models in your kill team that can one shot an opponent's operative, and those are, of course, your premium pieces that you'll move heaven and earth to keep safe. Yeah, rail rifles exist, all sorts of things. Like the new Vespid kill team. Yeah. There's two members of that kill team who have medium chance, if opponent's not in cover, to just be like blap. And of course you got
launchers and stuff. It's
exactly right. The drop scion team. They've got a similar ability, but they can't do it from sitting in cover on the other side of the thing. They drop out of it and they're just like, haha, melter range, dunk, and see you later. And it's really cool to see those interactions as well. Obviously, I'll be buying a phenomenal amount of those scions, by the way, but go Red.
Oh, yeah, I mean, understandably so. I have a healthy amount of scions myself, and I don't see why I shouldn't add in a bunch of jump versions of them.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And since I was at the Tacoma Open, I actually started following some more of the tournament play a little bit. And I was introduced to some of these builds because you can buy equipment and gear for, members of your team. I was introduced to this one build of, they call it the Doom Guy build, Space Marine group, where they take one of the Space Marines and they essentially put all the bonuses and upgrades they possibly can on that one Space Marine. Space Marines are no joke either. I mean, they're already in. Looking at the new
13 wounds,
setup,
something like that is where they were in the previous edition. I would look.
Yeah, they're a little bit higher than the average model, and they also my boys play again, and one of them's playing Necrons, and he's got 5 Warriors and 5 Immortals, and then my other boy is playing Space Marines, and he's got 5 Space Marines. And that's considered a perfectly legitimate kill team. Those 5 guys are going to carry it. They're going to do it. They're going to run the board. And you can then plus up and bonus up one of them into this whole Doom guy thing, and he's got the ability to like react when another one dies near him or whatever, and he essentially runs around and just Doom guys the whole board, and it's hilarious. I'm like talking my kid into painting one in like a dark green.
What a lad! He definitely should.
Yeah.
So terrain matters in the game. Advantage when you're on higher terrain, it actually gives you a benefit. If you're on lower terrain, the conceal orders, those are all the same. So if you had any experience with Kill Team before, there's enough of that connective tissue that will be, you could carry it forward and kind of jump into this a little bit easier, in my opinion. And plus, if you already happen to have a Kill Team of the right models, then you get to play.
Yeah, so I love what Red was saying about playing with his children, because Red's a 40k player, which means he has like 97 kill teams.
Yes.
Probably of vast and varying different outfits, loadouts, everything. And so you can look at it like Kill Team is a very easy way to get into and introduced to the 41st millennium, but it's also any of us who play 40k, who have a single like 2,000 point 40k army, probably have 3 or 4 good kill teams in our collection. And you can always go the other way and just be like, I'd like to give this a crack. So 100% give it a go, because it's a great system. I heartily endorse the new Kill Team. I think it's fantastic.
We do a lot of these demos and play games at the conventions that are attached to a Warhammer tournament and stuff, and it's always popular, and people dig it because you get to use your miniatures, you get to play a pretty fast game, and you feel like the models in your force are all heroic, no matter
in
what.
addition, so I played I think about 5 or 6 games of the new Kill Team in the lead up, whilst just being at the Nova Open, in the lead up to the demo game by the 2 world champions we had on, and no 2 games played the same. I didn't see any 2 games that I watched that I played that played the same, because at a bare minimum, let's say Red or Tanya, you've got 6 or 7 models in your kill team. I have 10 operatives in my kill team. If you just activate a different operative in your first turn than the one you did previously, the game's going to play different. And it can be just as simple as that, and then who you choose to put on advantage, who you choose to work themselves up onto a vantage point rather than not. Game will play completely differently. What equipment pieces you choose to take in your kill team will make the game play completely differently. And so I love that. I love that you could play the same kill teams versus each other ad nauseum and still have different and varied, enjoyment from it. And I think that's really special because, we say what you will about the state of 40k at the moment. It's very calm waters. The meta's really quite balanced. But if I, with my Dark Angels Gladius, play against Paul with his Blood Angels, who cares? Depending on who goes first, it's pretty much going to be a very similar play pattern with what occurs, because we're both going to have the same models. We're going to be the only thing that will really drastically change is the cards we move off the top and what primary objectives we have. It's going to be a very logical, plottable system. And then, of course, it comes down to the dice rolls. But we could play 10 games, and I would assume probably about 6 of them would feel very similar if the same person went first and second for all 10 games.
Whereas we know the outcome, too, after turn 2 or 2.5, 3, what kind of be on the wall. Kill Team,
100, yeah.
Little more
100%
volatile.
different. Yeah, very, very, very volatile, and I love that about it.
Action points. That's kind of one of the core things about the system is that each model has action points that it can do certain things, and every time you go to act, it costs you a point, including tapping and capping objectives and things like that. So there's a bit of a trade-off similar to actions, that are there, but that sometimes that plays into how you interact with your force and some of when you really get to know like the ins and outs of your action point burn rate, what you can do, what you have to do. That's some of the nuance that I think is a very exciting element of the game. And it also helps to make you have different value choices when you're picking your operatives and what your kill team, the one you may choose to do. If you feel like you need a bunch of action points to get a win, that may influence the type of kill team you need. If you feel like you like beefier, stronger things and want to plot across the table and in a predictable format, different kill teams for that. Every faction has multiple kill teams, and it kind of leads into the conversation of the seasons that they announced on the Warhammer community site a couple of weeks ago, which is going to have a cycle that kill teams will roll in and roll out. I think it's different opinions on how generous that cycle is, and I don't necessarily want to jump into that debate, but that I think it's a really long period of time, and once it gets rolling, it'll feel like it keeps the game fresh. But we'll see. TBD. It's a brand new thing.
We'll see.
That's the segment on Kill Team. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back and talk about net listing. See you in a minute.
FTN is brought to you by Discount Games Inc. Please visit them at www.discountgamesinc.com. And don't forget to ask Jay about ways to save even more on your hobby projects.
We are back, everybody. Thanks for checking out our sponsors and our Patreon and clicking all the stuff that's supposed to click. By the way, if you made it this far, this is the second half of the show. Do us a favor, hit the like, subscribe if you haven't already. That means a lot. It's one of the ways it kind of tricks the algorithms and all the computers and whatever the tubes that connect our access to all of humans' information.
It's definitely tubes. Definitely long feeder tendrils.
But thank you all for doing that. We humbly ask that you could do that for us in some capacity. Let the show know what's up. So net listing. So we were talking in the pre-show and over a couple of weeks. It's like there's a whole lot of tournament play out there. People are paying attention. People are kind of focused on competitiveness, and a lot of people are bringing lists that they have seen other people use and have success with, and how can one emulate that success or expect the same level of success? And that was a question that we talk about. We hear from folks, even folks on the show if they want to talk about.
I'm the folks.
It's a thing.
I know, like I exist in a very competitive local meta, and I'm a bit of a Timmy player, if you know, like the Magic the Gathering kind of terms. So I like to bring like silly lists with big things, and in general, I do okay considering that I don't really pay any attention to the meta, but the few times that I've tried to take a net list, because sometimes when you're in coaching or you have people who are trying to help you, they'll say, oh, just take this list. This list does really well. So I'll try it, and then I do worse than I do with my Timmy lists. So
it's okay, Tanya. When you say you don't pay attention to the meta, I don't listen to Adam either.
Well, there it is. Everyone can tick it off their bingo card now. We did it.
I've thought about this concept a little bit, and I hear people. Again, I look at games. I talk about games. So I'm probably as guilty of this as anyone else. But when people are describing like a unit or a way unit works, sometimes they talk about them in a way that I think is taking for granted that you have enough command points to use the stratagem, that you're in the exact series of events that lets them shine, like you are the one that initiates the charge, you are the one, like you do all this other stuff that people, when they're describing what the unit does, you don't hear about all that.
Well, in addition, it's a lot of the net lists are based on things that do well in a very wide big event meta, which usually is, quite spread out and stratified and all these things. Whereas your net listing in your local meta might not, that list might not function well in it. Like, for example, Eradicators in a 200 player GT, they're going to have a lot of targets, a lot of monsters, a lot of vehicles are going to come up more often than not. They're going to have something to do. If your local meta is a bunch of infantry, beasts, cavalry, they have no good targets. And so you need to know what you're talking about, because when you put in the Apothecary Buy Low, just chuck it in a repulsor, you're looking at a 350 point package, more closer to 400 point package. And if you're taking that thinking it's going to give you results that Joe Bloggs did at the 300 player Slobber Knocker, because there was a bunch of Votan and big demons and knights and stuff, you're not going to have a similar result. So I'm all for I'm all for net listing, but I'm all for putting your own analysis upon it. Like, why did this do well? Will that be something I'm able to replicate based on my skill set, based on my local opponents, based on what I'm likely to come across, based on my terrain format, for example?
I got to say, how disappointed I am. I just looked up on BCP and did not find a slobber knocker event.
Is that not a term you guys use?
It is.
It is, yeah.
Someone should definitely. There has to be a big event called the Slobber Knocker, like the September Slobber Knocker or something. Or
Summer.
I don't know. I don't think it's going to happen.
Red, there's a gap in the market, mate. What are you doing this weekend?
We've identified all sorts of opportunity here. But no,
it's going to happen.
That is a great
part
point.
1 through 4.
I thought you were going to go with the idea of like, you're going it all into Tyranids and you're trying to take, there's Horde Tyranids. That's all. That 80 of your friends play that style, and so the elite infantry list may not be a great counter for that. But I think that, kind of what I was talking about before, though, is that we talk about things sometimes in that vacuum of everything being absolutely perfect and without necessarily describing sometimes how you have to engineer some of that, such as, you'll hear people talking about the Angels having always lethal hits and Lance. They're always going to have it. Well, that's not really the case. Only certain units may have Lance a lot, and only Lance a lot. And only certain units will get those lethals when you have the command points to burn. It's going to be a CP thirsty army, if you ask me.
Yeah.
So I think like my issue that I'm having with net lists is that the people who are doing well are also terrible teachers. So they will tell you to just take this list and you'll have success
just roll
with
better.
it.
Yeah,
just roll better.
Just roll a bunch of sixes.
But really, they're not taking into account my play style, and they're not taking into account, maybe they are taking into account a little bit, but I think that there's a certain level of knowledge that they assume that I have in order to just take this list and make it work.
Well,
so there's got to be some step in between, or some way that I can evaluate what they're telling me to do in order to get the information that I am obviously missing. They don't know I don't know it.
Some perspective is like, so we can go, I know we mentioned Magic a little bit. It's a good, I think, analogy to a tournament scene of something that has a rotating pool of resources that float up to the top and exist in it's another type of living, breathing ecosystem with the meta. But the people that take a deck for the first time and win with it have like a million reps with that deck. You hear stories every now and then about how someone just decided to run that block of 60 on the morning of, but it's very, very rare. Most of the time they've come out of a brew session that's backed up by hundreds of games. I'm not saying you have to play 140k games. I mean, they have some volume of experience that have distilled that down, and so they have encountered more of the fringe situations than someone picking up a list for the first time, or just put the models together that the next past weekend.
And in addition, if you're somebody who can just slap together a deck of 60 cards there and go and win a large Magic tournament, you have, to Tanya's point, you are assumed to be somebody who enjoys playing at that level, who has a personal invested interest and has a level of time to gain proficiency at that level that would let you pick those things up and use them to a certain extent. Whereas what sounds like Tanya is happening is people are just like slamming the meal in front of her, and she's like, "I didn't order this."
I don't even have a fork and a knife to be able to
exactly
get
right.
this
Yeah,
from play
I've got the wrong
tomorrow.
utensils,
Yeah.
and I actually quite like that analogy. But where do you think, and what would you think you would need in your case to bridge that gap? Like, where do you feel like the holes are in that transition to possible success, I guess?
If I had that answer, I feel like I would be working towards the solution. I don't know, but I think that there's a disconnect between every net list that I have played or have had suggested to me and my personal play style.
Sure.
Has anybody sat down with you and like I don't know if you'd write a list or whatever, but talked about your personal strengths as a player, and then rather than just windmill slamming something in front of you, try to find something that
obviously
exists
this
in the
is
ecosystem.
good. Someone's
that is a
won
good
with
fit.
this. You should
someone's on with
this
this,
too.
just play this, rather than
Yeah.
sitting down and having an analysis of what you enjoy about the game. Because if you enjoy playing said faction, you're going to just inherently have a better success rate, or you will lose just as much but be happy about it. And what your personal strengths are. Yeah, like do you prefer melee lists? Do you prefer pressure lists? Do you prefer denial based lists, etc., etc.? You want to ride from deep strike and have threatening rapid ingresses? Like, what do you find exciting and interesting about the game? And I feel like this is a very important thing that we don't talk about, because we always try and just tell people all the pegs are the same, because all 40k is played whatever. We just constantly, everyone's just expected to be the round peg, but all the holes are different. Like,
yeah.
Well,
Like, honestly, I don't even know if I have any strengths when it comes to Warhammer.
Sure.
I certainly can't see them, and anytime that I've asked a coach to enlighten me if they think that I'm doing something well, I usually get like, oh, you're a beacon of your community, or you're a really good painter, which isn't really helping me with the problem at hand.
Doesn't score mission points most of the time.
Sure.
Get you 10 points.
Well,
Well, on the topic of the, like, if you were to take a list that is historically successful, or I should say historically successful, has some success recently, like in the snapshot of what the meta is today, and try to win with it next weekend. There are a bunch of contributing factors to that. One, folks have now seen that there are some percentage of people that you're going to encounter at the next tournament that have some alteration made to their list because that list had a high profile win. So they may have a bit of a foil built into that. So that's another hill that you would have to climb right there. And I'm telling you, this is a fringe thing. Why I say it's fringe, someone would have had to have had that awareness and done it. Then you would have had to have been matched up against them, and then you would have then not rolled out of that situation, or played into that situation somehow, or that one fringe thing that it is. So there's a lot of things that would have had to occur to make that the thing. Knowing how everything layers, there's a bunch of layers in list. I do, like, candidly, I do think that the missions are more accessible now than they have been in editions past, and so you can score points. You may not win the game, but it's kind of laid out for you like a path to score points. But the layers to the list of characters with certain abilities, like if you have a character that can lead multiple units, and you choose the different unit to stick that leader in, which, by the way, I'm not saying that you've done any of this. I just mean these are hurdles that people have to deal with. That may lower down your efficiency. If you don't have experimentation with the command points and how often you need to spend them or conserve them, that could also mean that you're kind of hanging out there in the wind when that unit would have been able to shine, or that force would have been able to shine, because the command points weren't there to fuel it. And I think that those are pitfalls that could occur when dealing with a list that you aren't incredibly familiar with ins and out just yet.
So, and in the same vein, I find something I'm having to do in my current line of work. I happen to have shifted jobs, right? There's a whole thing where I was moving, and now I'm in my new job. My new job is in different area where a lot of it has to do with
trying to say classified is what he's trying to say.
No, not at all.
National
Yeah,
security.
he's trying not to tell us it's classified. So I'm sorry, everybody, it's not classified. Everybody knows
I'm
what
trying
red
to
does.
find the right way to say it without being so like off the wall military about it. That I'm in a training environment right now, and in that training environment, one of the things that we're really focusing on, two aspects: the fundamentals, trying to identify what the fundamentals are, and it's interesting as I'm engaging with a lot of people on this topic on what exactly are the fundamentals, right? And I think that there's a large discussion that can be had, in that, some people will say, well, in list building, you need to know what the fundamental, we've talked about, what this tool does or what that unit can accomplish and the redundancies that you can build into it, so on and so forth. But the the fundamentals of how you go about playing a game, right? What the objectives are, what's the system to it, what do you need to do to get into that, and there's no standardization to that because there's so many different ways that people go about it, and that's okay. I'm not saying there has to be, but I can see where that can make it difficult bringing someone into it, especially with how some of the game adjusts and shifts and the scope as you're trying to address it, because as we've talked about terms and conditions and how you have to set something up to get something going, you find all too often you get into a game and you're like, well, I'm playing it this way and I'm playing it under this concept and notion and I'm moving forward with this framework, but you just showed up with this army that has this super niche exception that was introduced recently in one thing that, so on and so forth, and it's only you can only find it in a PDF that whatever, or something like that, right? And there is an aspect to that where there's a gap between what we would try to focus on in the fundamentals and then all these niche things off to the side. And so you can see where it could be difficult for anyone in some cases to really make that gap and where they come into it. And then as you talk about the competitive aspect and where you see some of the competitive folks, as much as, to Tanya, to bolster your point, as much as I love a lot of these super competitive folks out there and the way that they break things down, they're so steeped in that they can't, like, it's hard to look down and distill something like the fundamentals when your own actions are so consolidated in a lot of the complex or more mature efforts that go into it. And I'm just correlating that with a lot of my own professional things that I'm going through right now too, because again, there's a lot of, the conversations being had of what are the fundamentals, and admittedly, where I'm at in my job, I'm talking to a bunch of people who have been doing the job for 20 years or so, and they're all sitting there trying to agree, well, what are the fundamentals that the most junior person needs to understand? And I just see a parallel there in the discussion that's being had. And so I think this is a developing conversation. This is a conversation that has to continue, that we have to continue to drag out, because we're not going to solve it in the next 5 minutes, much less the next 5 episodes. You know what I mean?
It's interesting to me too that you bring up the fundamentals, and I think because I used to be a manager. I used to be, responsible for hiring and retention of staff and all of that stuff. And teaching people is something that I generally am very good at. And so for me, I do know that I need to learn the fundamentals. And so the problem is then you go to people who are very, established within the competitive community, and you ask them, like, what even are the fundamentals? None of them can tell you. None of them.
They may make a stab at it or what have you, and it's still, maybe it doesn't have traction with the junior entry level community in that sense. And that's where I go back to in certain aspects the different game systems, like Age of Sigmar and Spearhead, for example. Starting at some smaller scopes of things can allow you to experiment in that fundamental realm a little more than being overwhelmed by 2,000 points of hammer smash that comes at you. And so there's some things to that. There's some steps to that I think, like I want Combat Patrol and 40k to be like Spearhead and Age of Sigmar, but I know that they're still developing that system and still getting there. I think that there's all the potential for GW, the company, to get there, but it's not there yet. And to that extent, I think if you go back to if you took everything out, and I do appreciate it. My boys have it. We have laminated. In fact, we got it out of a White Dwarf. In a White Dwarf, there was like a quick rule reference set along with just the basic rules, right? That'll just come in like one of the starter sets or something like that. It's literally a front and back page of here is a turn, and here's the things you do, and here's how you go about it. And I'm not saying that I'm teaching my children how to play the game the best by any means, but it's definitely something that we're working through. and like how to get them all online with it, so that because I haven't even gotten into full like stratagem employment as we go through it, right? And like I know that seems like, oh my gosh, how do you play this game without stratagems? Well, I need them to kind of figure out like the rolling dice and terrain piece. You know what I mean? So it's we're still working on it.
With that, talking about list and powerful units in list, there are powerful units that you would think this powerful unit is just going to be powerful, but you still like you could waste it. Like Canis Rex, I've wasted Canis Rex in how many games? That model is a beast. 2 models is a beast. But sometimes you need the reps in with how to, and then knowing the ins and outs, knowing how you can look at some stats, and the stats don't necessarily tell the story of the model the whole time. And so doing the reps, seeing how things link together, really picking it apart, like how does it work, when does it work, and those are the things I think are helpful. And and everything that we've covered, it's not a failing of a player to not be able to make a winning list win again, because there's a lot of factors that go into that. Die roll could be a thing too, and I don't like to blame the dice. That's not what anybody's saying here. Sure. The dice are a failure point, but I think when I talk to a lot of the players that have what we might know as a high win ratio, one of the things they talk about is almost in absolutes, and there aren't many absolutes in the game. You have to engineer those absolutes, and I can see how there is a bit of a disconnect about how to start to begin to engineer those things, so those you almost like ritualize it, so it seems much more common to you, and you may lose that path of how you got there. And I think maybe to the point is like they've already started with a higher, a stronger grasp on some of those concepts, and trying to explain what those concepts are, it might not have been done effectively in the area you're talking about.
I think it's a great point, and I think that there's something to the without I'm trust me, I'm not like launching off or jumping the shark on this when I talk about the relativity of time in relation to when you can get those reps and sets in, and the ability to execute that. Because you'll see with net listing or meta chasing and things like that, how people will change things up all the time. They'll bring in different elements, they'll jump armies, they'll do all that. But the ability to just sit there with the same army and just run that army without the environment changing so much, right? Like that's, if you can't just sit there and play a bunch of games, I admit, I don't have the time to play as no one does, but I really don't have the time to play as many games as I want, and I don't get the ability to do those reps and sets as much as I want. And again, back to like my profession and my real job and everything, that same mentality. Classified. If you can just not at all, if you can just, but the reps and sets thing is a huge aspect. If you can iterate, if you can constantly just train and practice, that practice is a big thing. And it is the circumstance that goes into that can vary so much. And these players that have the ability to jump and leap through different armies and change things up, I wish them all the best. But to the point of training a group of people to try and get and develop them, it's that shifting and constantly changing doesn't help anybody in a lot of sense. It helps some that want to go for it, and they can do that. But I think that it does. It can make it difficult for people. Whereas I think there's something to just being able to lean into what you got, right? Like I've talked about it before. I mentioned it in the pre-show. Like I've played for World Eaters from 7th edition and on. I've just massed berserkers. That's it. And there's something to, like, when I know I'm going to play now. We've changed through Khorne Demonkin. We've gone through the introduction of the World Eaters and Angron, and like new elements have been introduced. But for the most part, my fundamental core there is melee of throwing these Khorne Berserkers, Rhino delivery to the charge, and then Khorne Berserkers out there. And I laughed in the comments. Someone talked about I'm throwing out some old Chaos player vibes and whatnot. And like that's a thing. Like I get it. Like I mean, I wasn't really playing Chaos in 5th edition. My brother was, but watching it and watching, when I mention the word Lash, there's people that'll have a traumatic response to that from 5th edition because Chaos sorcerers and the Lash.
Very strong ability.
Yep. It was a total thing. And I have a traumatic response from being on the receiving end of that. But back to the fundamentals and training piece, there was a fundamental to that component and the strength of that army of being able to go into melee and do a thing. And even as the game is tweaked and mechanics have shifted and whatnot, it's still got a very strong melee component. And I've just continued to be able to build on that. And I haven't had to focus on a bunch of shifting to ranged priorities and worry about range shooting to such a degree. I mean, I'm okay. I got bolter pistols. Here's my bolter pistols. Okay, all 40 of them over a period of time. But I mean, that's it. Like that's all I got. And then I just go back into all the melee rolling. But I think that makes a case, or at least as an anecdote of that focusing on development and practice and reps and sets over time, even through some of those circumstantial adjustments. And I'm not saying that it's led me to mass, crazy success or anything, but it has developed for me a degree of comfort. And but there's still to the point that I haven't had all the time to do it rapidly, if that makes sense. Like I can do reps and sets quickly and make that jump for sure.
So I love the idea of having a list and I just play it and play it and play it. Yeah. However, the lists that I make are ridiculous and are made mostly based off what I have painted and what I think looks cool. And it's a very casual way of doing things. I accept that. It's very hobby focused. Sure. So if I'm going to choose a net list and I'm going to play it enough to get the reps, do you know immediately if it is a good fit for you or not? Because every time that I've picked up a net list, I just feel like I'm so lost at the table, and it makes me think this is not the list for me. Is that correct, or should I fight through that?
So I think well, go ahead, Paul.
You got to have fun playing the list. I mean, otherwise, what are you doing, right? So if you enjoy the faction that it is and the models that are on the table, then I think it's worth trying to make it work, because you've got to put that time in to figure out how all the synergies link up and how to react in situations where you're playing down, when to overextend. Those are all things that kind of come with the time. But you got to have when I'm counseling people, I deal with people that have their first interaction with Warhammer sometimes, and they ask me, what should I play? Well, there's like a hierarchy of needs, and it's, do you like the look of the army, do you like the play style, or do you like the lore? And you get to decide what is at the top of that food chain. I just listen off in an order, but you get to decide what's important to you. And if more of those criteria are met than not, then it's probably worth investing the time and the effort and the hobby hours and stuff into. But if you don't like them,
so what if you like all of those, but you still get to the table and it's just does not feel like it clicks in any way, shape, or form?
See, that's where that's going to take the time, because the time there is figuring out how to make it click. Why are these pieces there? When someone sits down to make a winning list, it's not just cramming a bunch of powerful units into an army list. We can all do that. It is figuring out ways that those units interact with the missions they expect to play, the terrain they're expected on the tabletop, and then the card flips as they come up.
So playstyle has nothing to do with it. I should just forget about playstyle and just try to figure it out.
Playstyle. Oh, go ahead, Ray.
I think that it can and it does. I think it is part of it. I do agree with working through it enough to be able to tell if it's really something that isn't your play style. Sometimes there could be just some components, and one, because again, I'm sitting here, this will be the fourth time I've now used the word anecdote, right? Each time that if you only play one or two games, you say, this just isn't my play style. I'd argue that it's too small of a sample size in certain cases to say that it doesn't fit your playstyle. I think playstyle is important. I had a Tau army. I played a Tau army, and I didn't like it. I didn't like the way that, and this was 8th edition. I didn't like the drones and the range aspect of it. I wanted a more melee thing, and it didn't fit my playstyle. I like a more. I mean, I liked my Necrons. I liked my 3 units of Locust destroyers back when they were just destroyers. But there wasn't a separation of it. And then they came out with Scorpec destroyers, which happened to be melee. And I love things with large axes. And so I wanted to go more in that direction, and I had more fun with it, but I'll argue and still think that that wasn't as good as the Locust destroyer setup that I was playing. But it took me a lot to kind of figure that out, to play into that. I had the iterations to that point where I determined that I even though I wanted that, for example, like with the Necrons, it was more of my play style to go with the Scorpex, but it wasn't playing out as well just because the strengths of it at the time or whatever wasn't there. And I wouldn't have found that out if I'd only gone like two games in. And now I'm not saying you're only going 2 games in. Like, I just think sometimes, to Paul's point, it does take some time to feel that or see that or really get that. And I think that, as we go through this, again, as a developing conversation, and of course, us all being team members, a net list maybe is just a good launching point or something like that, maybe. Because you assume when we talk about net lists that even though it wasn't talked about or it wasn't deliberately brought out or teased out or whatever, that there are some winning components or some successful components, arguably some functional fundamentals that have been baked into the making of that list.
Like, I'm not a Space Marine infiltrator enthusiast, but they provide some stats and abilities that I like in the list, so that becomes a utility piece and less of a actual play style that is there they perform functions on the table.
Sure, yeah. As objectives have become more of a thing and you can't just wipe someone off the table, infiltrators have had a functional space in what I would say, if we wanted to start forming some of this, board control is a fundamental. You can actually ignore it to a certain extent, but at your own risk, given the wide range of things out there. Board control doesn't mean you have to have, overbearing presence on the board. It's control is a thing that you can give or take and that kind of deal. And so but infiltrators for Space Marines specifically seem to add an element of board control because 5 guys that each eke out a 12-inch, radius of no deep striking, no really anything. Like, they prevent you from even showing up 3 inches away from them or something like that, are kind of a big deal if you put 2 squads of them in the back. And so, again, if board control was a fundamental, they really lean into enabling that fundamental. And so it'd be difficult if you play 2 games and the person you play against doesn't have any deep striking. You'd never get to really test that.
Or I misdeploy them. I bunch them all up and don't get the full use of them or something like that or whatever.
Sure. Sure, I get it. So if I am, whatever, I am a person who has played some games. Sure. I'm not proficient. I don't win anything. I live in a small town, so I don't get to experience every single faction. I get it. But I am a person who has decided that I want to play a net list. Mm-hmm. How do I go about choosing one? If playstyle is somewhat of a concern,
it matters.
Something that I'm looking at when I'm choosing, or do I just disregard that? What am I looking at?
Definitely try to find something that is similar. Well, one that you like, you're gonna like spending time with. Because that's one of the things it requires. You have something that you like spending time with. Again, the look of the army, and I'm speaking more generally, not specifically for you. But if you're looking at play style, find something that's similar. Find something you think it's like, oh, that has a couple of big pieces. I like the big pieces. That has a good ratio of close combat shooting. That's I could get down with that. Find something that's in the same zone. I would because you're going to have to build, paint, and play this thing, and you're going to have to enjoy it.
Unless you borrow hammer.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's a technique. Yeah.
Especially for team
Plenty of stuff
tournaments,
I wouldn't, but you could.
it's more common than I like to see in team tournaments because but at the same time also someone who has done that, so I'm not throwing any shade at all. But yeah, but thankfully there are winning lists out there that are all across the board. Like there's Thousand Suns, the Depths of Sorotas. There's all Votan has won. World Leaders. I mean, there's stuff out there all over the place that has been winning. So there are things to choose from more now than there have been in the past, like in the last year, which is good. But I definitely think find something in the same play style zone. Now, candidly, you might have to compromise some of your play style to increase the win percentage. I don't know that's true yet, but that may be something that has to happen, and know that could be one of the sacrifices. But anytime you're taking somebody else's brew and trying to make it your own, that's like table stakes, if that makes sense. But I would definitely find something in the same neighborhood for something that you think you'll enjoy, some aspect that looks exciting to you, and then jump off of that. And I do think, and I know I maybe sound like I'm beating it to death. I think that when people are describing what a unit does or what a list does, they're taking some things for granted, like that Goldilocks zone exists all the time, and it doesn't. That takes effort to organize, arrange, and then implement, and it is not always as transparent as maybe the person that has played it 1,000 times feels that it is. And so not being able to instantly replicate the success of someone else is not a failing. That's just something that will occur over time. And what I think what taking a list that has done well previously does is help you short circuit that time process a little bit. It will take some amount of less time, but the time is not zero. Maybe like next week I will unfortunately be on vacation. Well, fortunately,
You mean fortunately?
Fortunately, be on vacation, but unfortunately, will not re-record a show. But maybe the week after we do one on playtesting, like how to get to figure out the nuts and bolts and viability of a list, because we probably all approach it differently, and it's a topic that it would be cool to get to again. I know in years past we've talked about it, but the game's a little bit different now. Mission's different now. Training's different now. It's probably worth revisiting if y'all are fine with it.
Yeah.
I will take any tips that anybody is willing to give me. I'm taking a little bit of a break from competitive play, but just because I want to run a narrative league.
That sounds fun.
It's going to be a lot of work, and I just know I'm not really going to have time to do anything else because I'm going to be writing missions for like each matchup, each round. And so I'm going to be taking a little bit of a break, but that doesn't mean that I'm taking a break from learning.
Right, absolutely. Cool. There's going to be plenty to like see and learn, and maybe some people from the Narrative League will have some interesting combinations that you wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Oh, I'm sure that they will. I'm sure. There's some people that I know who are not going to miss this for anything, and they always bring weird lists. So I'm really looking forward to it.
All right. Well, that's our show this week. It's been a pleasure talking about these topics with y'all. Please don't forget to do all those action things that you'll have to do for the videos and the podcast. For listening to us on the aggregators, please leave us those 5-star reviews. We will see y'all in just a couple weeks, everybody. Good night.
See ya.
Bye, everybody.